houses are some of the most glamorous palaces of entertainment and feature in cityscapes around the world. They're temples of music, architectural gems, and they're bursting with fascinating stories of famous composers, divas, amorous aristocrats, boys castrated to retain their high voices, and even ghosts. They're often centres of spectacular creativity, homes of vibrant opera and ballet companies and orchestras. Opera houses have played an important part in the urban social fabric. No self-respecting European city during the 18th and 19th centuries would be without an opera theatre, built to display cultural sophistication and wealth. But they can also be found in Asia, the Middle East, the Americas, and even the Brazilian rainforest. The first were built inside Renaissance palaces. Many early opera houses were lost to fire, but they're still being constructed today, high-tech in concrete, steel and glass. I'm Lucy Woodruff, and I love opera. And I find opera houses as atmospheric and exciting as the performances themselves. I want to take you with me around the world to discover some of the most beautiful theatres. We'll look at the architecture with Dan Cruickshank, admire the works of art and phenomenal craftsmanship, meet the fascinating people who work there, the singers, the conductors and the dancers. We'll find out what happened there in the past, and maybe hear a bit of backstage gossip too.
And now it's time to tell a tale.
Though London's two opera houses, the Royal Opera House and the Coliseum, are located close to one another in the heart of Theatreland, they don't have a lot in common. They're architectural opposites. Built by the Australian impresario Sir Oswald Stoll in 1904, the Coliseum is an extraordinary building designed by the great theatre architect Frank Matcham in a flamboyant and eclectic style, quite different to neoclassical Covent Garden. While the Royal Opera House is famous the world over, with operas performed in the original languages, the Coliseum is mostly known to English audiences, with all operas performed in English. At the Royal Opera House, audiences can often be quite formally dressed, whereas the Coliseum prides itself on a more casual atmosphere. It doesn't really matter what you wear, but I enjoy dressing up for both houses, as a night at the opera in London is such a special occasion. It was designed not as an opera house, but as a variety theatre for the impresario Sir Oswald Stoll. It's opulent and redolent of the Edwardian Belle Epoque era. You almost feel there might be the ghost of an expensive cigar smoke lingering in the air. It's the biggest theatre in London and was intended to be a people's palace of entertainment, an all-day venue open to everyone and suitable for families, with tea rooms at the front. It didn't actually become an opera house until 1968, when the Sadler's Wells Opera Company moved there. Sadler's Wells Opera Company was created for English singers and to nurture homegrown talent, as well as access to opera for all. It's in the heart of the West End, Theatreland, and the home of the English National Opera. At the Coliseum, the English National Opera performs everything in English and has a reputation for adventurous repertoire and a high artistic quality. Isn't it wonderful? I mean, it's such an eclectic and exotic building.
It is.
What do you think about the exterior?
It's built to proclaim its presence, to get the audience in, to intrigue, to have a place in the West End. The outside, well, it's a washable architecture. I love that too. You know, terracotta. It's good. The idea of that was that it kind of the soot would wash off in the rains. The other big thing, of course, is Byzantine. Eclectic, yes, but essentially it's classical, and it's going to the Byzantine period, which was very fashionable in the late Victorian, or this period, early 20th century. You know, it was the middle ground between the great pompous classical expressions, such as the opera house with its great portico. It's a great expression of that moment. What's wonderful, though, is it's a bit of an art historical essay, but it works brilliantly, doesn't it, as a great performance space, you know, built, I say, solidly, economically, and with the structure kind of skinned over with beautiful ornamentation, and of course the structure allowed, as to see inside, it's creation of huge open space. Quintessentially modern building.
Yes.
I love it. With that looking history. And this building, this vestibule is sensational. The epitome of the Byzantine. So it's a saucer dome, over a cube, like Byzantine churches. Lovely ornamentation, and you have these panels here. That's obviously music, isn't it?
Yes.
And then so the organ and so on, and
the mandolin and
the visual arts here, painting, sculpture, brilliant, and
pottery.
And also the floor. It's wonderful.
Isn't it fantastic?
Yeah. Again, say the
Welcome.
ornamental. Welcome, but also, tragedy and comedy. I'm on tragedy where I belong. And also, again, it's economical. It's very solid sound and very beautiful. And of course, very Roman. Lots of things. Brilliant. Frank Matcham's brilliant, isn't it? Mixture of modern history, the practical mind.
Do you think it works on St Martin's Lane as a facade, It's slightly irregular, isn't it?
Yeah, that's fine. I mean, St Martin's Lane is an extremely ancient street, actually, with a good mixture of buildings. There's some good 18th century buildings next door, in fact, and many 19th century buildings. So it adds variety to a street already distinguished by variety. I suppose it is a point about, it's a big building, naturally. It's a big theatre, whether the scale could have been a problem, but now it's a massive ornament to the place, isn't it? Yeah. And of course, intended or not, but the sequence of experiences coming from the north towards Trafalgar Square, the Tower of St Martin's Field by Gibbs, 1720s. Then you get into the square, and this is a milestone on that progress down that street. It's terrific visually now. You feel you've come here for a
good night out.
A good night out, inspiring, but also enjoyable.
Yes.
Enjoyable.
Yeah.
What's intriguing about this building is that it's, I say, modern structure, ornamented in a historical manner, but also quite complicated, isn't it, getting people in and out? This is fascinating. A staircase going down, beautifully ornamented, with lovely classical details. So Byzantine's been abandoned. This is good classical stuff.
Greco-Roman.
There, the palmettes, and a lovely Roman oak leaf wreath, and so on around us here. It's very so classical, very, very
yes.
What goes on in
Oh, I'd love to know. Let's have a look.
Oh, it looks rather good. Beautifully ornamented.
It's beautifully ornamented.
Good heavens. I won't tell you what's going on in there.
No.
Edwardian.
Okay.
I think the Prince of Wales just left. It's beautiful little, there's a lovely little panel room.
Yes.
With a round table. It's extraordinary. There's a social history of Edwardian London. The rich, the poor, the king, the working people coming to enjoy the music, to enjoy culture. Yes. And the building is incredibly cleverly constructed to accommodate everyone at once, who then gather in the great hub, the auditorium, where the whole world comes together. There is the globe, there is the world meeting in that space. The rich, the poor, enjoying the unification, right? But being unified by the art, by the performance.
All the world is here.
It's the classes meet for a shared artistic experience.
Love is free as an eagle soaring across the sun.
It's great to see you. Thank you for having us here.
Oh, welcome.
We're having such a great time looking around this amazing theatre.
Oh, brilliant. I'm really pleased.
So, Stuart, it's such an incredibly flamboyant and glamorous theatre. It must be wonderful coming to work every day.
It is. It's surreal. I mean, my office is backstage, but I can choose to walk through the auditorium to get to it. At lunchtime, I get my sandwich and I sit right at the top of the balcony and either watch the technical teams changing the set or just sit in an empty auditorium. And it's amazing. You kind of get the sense of 100 years of memories and ghosts and opera.
Yes. Actually, I heard there was a ghost.
There's definitely a soldier that people have seen in the balcony in a particular seat, wandering. And the story goes that his wife is here. She used to come a lot and lament his death from the First World War. There's also a child that people say they see on that side of the balcony.
Really?
And then there's a guy who regularly, apparently, tells people to move out of his seat. And when they go to the usher and say, look, someone's in my seat, and come back, the guy's not there anymore.
How bizarre. Are there any downsides, do you think, to working in an Edwardian building?
Quite a few.
Are there? Yes.
I mean,
a challenge.
Firstly, the shape of it. Everyone thinks it's a square, but in fact it's a square with a twist and then another square.
Right.
There's a really basic thing, which is audience expectations in terms of things like toilets and bars have really changed in 100 years.
Yeah.
And particularly access for people in wheelchairs. Now it's a kind of human right. Then it felt like it was a kind of extra.
Yes.
I can't imagine many people nowadays attempting to build a theatre in such a tightly confined space and do it so quickly. I think Frank Matcham was a master of, engineering. And to build something that some people would see as completely beautiful, others might see as slightly gaudy, but every detail of the theatre is taken up with an idea.
Yes.
And he didn't hold back.
No.
And I think nowadays a modern designer might say less is more. But actually those who love the Coliseum, and I'm one of them, loves the fact that he hasn't spared an inch.
No. Every surface is decorated, and actually some of it quite expensively. I mean, it really is a vast theatre, isn't it?
It's huge.
It's the biggest in London, I think.
It is,
isn't it?
yeah. It seats 2359, so 1 minute before midnight, 2359.
Being a custodian, which is what you are really, as the CEO here, of such an important historic building, it must feel like a huge responsibility.
It does. I mean, it's both a kind of rewarding responsibility and obviously quite a stressful responsibility. I mean, there are so few jobs, I guess, where you're really mindful on a daily basis of the history and that you're going to hand something on, you hope, for another 200 or 300 years.
So do you employ full-time maintenance staff here?
Yeah. So there's about 700 people work at the Coliseum.
Huge employer.
Yeah, massive, yeah. And that's just casuals in the building as well as staff in the building. Beyond that, there's probably about another 1,000 a year who are freelancers, whether it's singers or directors or designers. The maintenance staff is a tiny team. It's about 5, 6 people. Most of them have been here for decades, and so they have a proper sense of ownership of the building. So, for instance, when we look at the Royal Box, there was the Queen's insignia, ER, and when she died, we covered it up as a mark of respect. We also obviously had the national anthem, Benjamin Britten's version. It was the first time someone had ever sung "God Save the King."
Yes,
that version.
That was quite a moment, actually, singing that for the first time.
Really hit you in the solar plexus. And so our maintenance team, not only have to redo the insignia, so it says CR, but and not only have to bring their best craft skills, because it's a specialist skill, but actually they need to kind of brace themselves, because lots of them have been here for 30, 40 years, and they're aware that that could be there for another 20, 30 years. And it's a moment. English National Opera is part funded by the government. It used to have about half its funding from the government, and over the past few years, since I've been here, we're now down to about a third of the funding is from government, and the rest is self-generated. And so we fund the Coliseum, so it costs us about £3 million a year. But every 5 years, we potentially have quite a big thing to do. So our plan for the next 18 months is the roof.
Oh my gosh, acres of roof.
Yeah, totally.
Well, is it an acre, actually?
I think it is,
An acre of roof, And a football pitch.
You can either do it in a patchwork way, which is what has been happening for years.
Yes.
The problem with that is, if you find a leak there, you don't know if it's because the roof is leaking directly above that leak, or if it's over there and it's kind of weaving its way through
water
the
travels.
rafters. Exactly. So what we're going to do is cover the entire thing. You want to make sure it's protected for the next 20, 30 years. And modern things that people wouldn't have considered 100 years ago, like acid rain, pollution. Now we need really, really hard-wearing materials that are environmentally sensitive. So it's an expensive job. It'll be £1.5 million.
And what about the globe? What will happen to that, the revolving globe, while you're doing the revamp of the roof?
The globe, we're all obsessed with the globe.
Yeah.
And I think London's obsessed with the globe.
Yes.
So the globe will stay and always spin. We stopped it spinning for the Queen's mourning period, and we turned the lights out at 7 o'clock every night, but it started spinning again after she was buried.
Yes.
We've looked at the globe to see if we can move it faster. It takes, I think, 1 minute
Be exciting.
57 to spin.
Yes.
And I think actually the attention span of most modern audiences is a lot shorter. So we have looked at whether we can spin it quite a lot faster, but we've had structural engineers look at it and they're worried it might fall off.
Oh gosh, spinning into Nelson's column or something.
That's it.
Don't want that.
As an eagle soaring
George, have you ever been on the roof?
No.
No.
No,
To see the globe?
you can see it from the sort of conservatory by the sky bar, but the door's always locked, you can't get out there.
Oh, should we go and see if it's open now?
Yeah, why not?
Come on, let's go. Wow, look at this. This is amazing. And look, you can see Nelson and St. Martin's and this extraordinary revolving globe.
It's incredible, I've never been up here.
It's an amazing Baroque tower faced in terracotta tiles, statues and columns with Ionic capitals. And look at the muscly young men supporting the world. They're atlases. And the 4 beautiful lions, each with a paw rather playfully on a ball. The roaring guardians of the tower, attracting audiences from near and far.
and when I fall in
Frank
love,
Matcham designed at least 24 British theatres and remodelled many more, around 120 in all. He was known for creating magnificent theatres on difficult sites. This building was completely restored in 2004 to celebrate its centenary year. So George, what are the acoustics like here on stage?
Well, there is actually a sweet spot.
Oh.
I can't remember who told me, it may have been here.
Show me where.
I think it was Dame Anne Evans, actually. You see just where those chairs are?
Yeah.
If you sing from that spot, it's as though you've just walked into this enormous sort of bubble of acoustic.
Yeah.
And you'll notice all the veterans sort of gravitating towards it. You sing from there, it's as though everything gets loud all of a sudden. And
How
the whole place
fantastic.
starts reverberating.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And you sound good.
Well, that's the idea.
This is a huge auditorium.
Yes, which is the biggest opera house in London, certainly, isn't it? Interesting, the brilliance of Frank Matcham. Well, one should say here, he's gone full classical. Forget the Baritone, it's a lovely kind of classical details, other masks and so on. The big deal is, as all the buildings, it's a modern building, but dressed in the finery of the past. So you have a big span, big open space achieved with steel and technology and cantilevers. There's no big internal structure. The galleries are projecting forward, they're not on great columns, good sight lines. But the brilliant thing is, it's big, but it's intimate. It's not intimidating, as the gallery fronts come forward, and so you feel it's a small space, but you realise it's the biggest theatre space in London. So it's amazing, so successful. Again, you start to think about the ingredients that create a successful space like this. The atmosphere, obviously, is to do with the lights, the ornamentation. This obviously, economy was an issue, so obviously repetitive, but that is the way it is with classical women. All the faces are the same, which is fine, and good for acoustics, absorbing sound, don't they?
Yes.
The plaster and gypsum
Yes.
and hessian and so on and so forth.
Yes.
And up above, of course, is the dome, always the dome. And I guess that would have been a big ventilator up there, electric from the start, not the terror, horror of gas fumes.
Yes.
But ventilation's a big deal, so all those big issues of good sight lines, solid construction to save you from being burnt, good exits to get the audience in and out quickly. Gosh.
And there's a pit, of course, now.
Oh, yes.
I don't think there was a pit when it was first built.
Stuff. The pits are interesting. I mean, the proscenium, we know about that.
Yes.
Obviously, the Georgian theatre, Tudor doesn't, in the round. So we know that's part of the great, event of the change of theatre performance, framing the performance. But the pit, is that
Well, originally the
secreted?
pit meant something quite different, didn't it? The pit, actually, in a theatre was really the stalls, where the stalls are.
Yes, indeed.
So
that's
those
right.
were the cheap seats.
That's absolutely right.
And it wasn't actually the place for the orchestra initially.
Absolutely right. So like in the Tudor theatre, the groundlings gather around this projecting stage, don't they, standing up,
Yes.
where you can walk around, or you walk around the performers sometimes.
Yeah.
But of course, in the 8th century,
Yes.
like Beggar's Opera, I remember famously, I think it was in the audience were on the stage.
They were on the stage.
The Duke of Bolton
Yes.
was falling for Lavinia Fenton, who eventually married, who played Polly Peachum.
Yes.
You see those wonderful Hogarth showing the audience and him sitting flanking the performers.
Yeah.
Well, so there were seats up there. There were seats up there.
Yeah.
It's interesting also, isn't it? The kind of the democracy of space has changed. The audience were on the stage at some point. The ground very interesting. We are very lucky that it's here, and very lucky that it continues to function so well, fulfilling the purpose for which it was made. Well, over 100 years ago.
Well, here we are, backstage. I could probably offer you an apple or something from the props
Yes, well,
department.
They've been around a few years. It's always great, isn't it? The working machine, being the bowels of the ocean liner, the hum, the lights, utilitarianism to the fore. It's lovely. It's great. So this is the stage, of course. That's the back of the stage. That's the front of the stage. There's the arch.
People will be over there.
Yeah. So this is a screen over the set. It's great. I mean, obviously, I think it's relatively compressed, isn't it? Because it's
compared to the massive auditorium, you kind of think it's going to be a lot bigger, don't you?
Just a reminder, these are machines, and everything's an issue. Space is an issue. Money is an issue. So you compress your functional bit in the smallest area possible. Not opera house, it's not gigantic, that's modern, painted black. Yeah, you get the sense of the Edwardian building materials. It would have been steel girders up there, steel and maybe reinforced concrete, because concrete better really steel and concrete okay fire-wise. Lovely.
If you won't love me now, if you won't love me now,
Hi Simon, it's so good to see you. Oswald Stoll was the Australian impresario, wasn't he, who was behind this building?
Yes, Stoll came from Australia. He set up as a theatre impresario and built theatres all over the UK. He went into business with another impresario called Moss, and the Stoll-Moss empires were some of the biggest and most impressive theatres all over the UK. Now, they were not built for conventional what we call straight theatre. That's to say, they wouldn't have staged Shakespeare, they wouldn't have staged Bernard Shaw. What they put on was variety.
Yes.
And variety was somewhere between conventional theatre and music hall.
Frank Matcham, some little plaque to him there.
Yes, it's a very nice memorial to him. He was born in 1854. He died in 1920, very strangely, of an infection caught by cutting his fingernails too short.
No.
So let that be a lesson to us all.
I rather like this dress circle foyer.
It's a beautiful space, and it's obviously designed to give a feeling of luxury. Sir Oswald Stoll wanted this theatre to be a palace for the people. He wanted everybody to have the experience of a grand theatre space. It wasn't an opera house at the time, it was a variety theatre, but he wanted families to come here. And he spared no expense. At this stage, he was a very rich man, and he spent a fortune on beautiful stone, beautiful marble, and of course, Frank Matcham's architecture, lots of gilding, lots of mosaics, and beautiful stained glass. And the result is still 100 years on. Much of Matcham's early design work was done on a budget, and theatres are used to various types of illusion. One illusion was you wanted a lot of what looked like carved marble. Matcham would have used plaster, but it was reinforced with sacking and straw so it wouldn't fall off and hit the clients on the head. And stonework was often done, as you said, the scagliola technique of painting on plaster and rubbing it till it looks like marble. Here, there was no need for that kind of illusion, and everything, both the sculptures on the outside of the building and the beautiful carved work on the inside, was done for real by stonemasons, by stone carvers, and Matcham had access to the best artists in the business.
What's so amazing is that this incredible building has survived, and of course it's been restored, I'm sure at great expense, but we're so lucky that it wasn't bombed in the Second World War, like so many monuments.
It's an extraordinary thing that it wasn't, because a great deal of this part of London was very heavily bombed. The Royal Opera House received bomb damage, and there was obviously bomb damage in the Houses of Parliament. This theatre survived, and one of the things that you find going all over Europe is how rare it is for a great theatre in the centre of a city to have survived unscathed. So many opera houses tragically were bombed flat. Many of those have been restored, often from original designs. So in Dresden, here, everything we see is from the original design and from the original building. What was very much in front of Matcham's mind when he built this theatre, unlike his grand opera house in Belfast, the seats in the upper circle were just as comfortable and just as well upholstered as the seats in the rest of the auditorium. So you did not have to sit on shiny wood, you could actually sit on comfortable plush. There's a very funny story that when the theatre opened in 1904, they invited King Edward VII, who'd only been on the throne for 3 years, but was a sizable figure, even plumper than Frank Matcham. And he was invited to sit in the royal box, and they decided that the best way to get him from the street to the royal box was to have what was called a lounge, but it was actually a little tram car on wheels, which ran
On a track.
On a track. And the king solemnly got into this contraption, and they attempted to take him to his seat. It broke down halfway.
Maybe because he was a little overweight?
I wouldn't be at all surprised.
Yeah.
But he treated it all with great good humour and got out and walked to his seat, and the contraption was banished to another theatre and put to different use.
Yes.
But there were many, many contraptions and devices which were actually very forward-looking. One was lifts to get the customers to their seats.
Electric lifts.
Electric lifts were installed right at the beginning of the building. Fire escapes were taken very seriously. The whole safety aspect, which really revolves around the
avoiding fire.
And
escaping from fire.
Using an iron curtain, which was, of course, where Churchill got the phrase an iron curtain from.
I see.
The safety curtain, it's known as the iron.
Yeah.
So this was hugely important. People liked to feel safe in the theatre, and this was one way of making sure that they did.
I suppose fire was going to be less of an issue, though, in a theatre like this, because it was electric lighting.
Right from the start, they brought in electric lighting.
As opposed to gas and naked flames everywhere.
Yes.
Which is...
The electric lighting really started in theatres in America with a marvellous man called David Belasco, who was the playwright who wrote Madame Butterfly.
Oh,
the
yes.
original play.
Oh,
and
yes.
The Girl of the Golden West.
Right.
And Belasco had spotted that railway trains had very powerful lamps, and he borrowed the idea, and he then started using electric lighting, and electrical engineering had got to the point where you could have dimmer switches, you could dim a single light, a bank of lights, or all the lights using an enormous metal rack with wheels and cranks, and one person could operate all the lighting stages. You could preset them, and then you would operate them, and that was how the lighting was done. And you could dim from brilliant light to pitch darkness and come back up again.
Which must have revolutionised sets and
It absolutely
staging.
revolutionised sets. It meant that, and this of course was something to come to another point of Matcham's innovations, he put a triple revolving stage in the theatre.
Which is no longer here, I understand.
No longer here. It was the largest in Europe, and it was an idea which actually came from Japan originally. And to have a revolving stage, this had 3 sections, and you could have a chariot race with galloping horses, and you would simply rotate the stage.
With real horses?
Real horses, you could rotate the stage in the opposite direction so that the horses, while galloping, would have remained still in front of the audience. And this was very effective. A lot of designs were built so that you could have several different sets and they could be rotated into position, or you could put the thing on a spin, and the controls were like ship's engineering controls, where you have a little lever, and for each direction it would say stop, stand by, slow, faster, very fast, and then free fall.
I wonder what the horses thought of that. I mean, never worked with children and animals.
Children and animals is a very
Must have been quite
very
tricky.
good principle. They also had enormous water tanks. They had a 20,000 gallon
Underneath
tank
the building,
under the stage, and this could be used for nautical battles. This again wasn't a new idea.
It's like the Coliseum in Rome.
In the 50s and 60s, people started to turn to the cinema for that kind of spectacle, and in fact in the 50s the Coliseum was used as a cinema with an enormously wide screen.
The greatest sensation at this time was the presentation of King Kong at the theatre, which had several showings at the Coliseum every day for months, with 10,000 people seeing the film at the theatre every day.
Simon, I've just noticed this, and what are those designs? It kind of reminds me of something operatic. But
Well, it's very interesting because this dome, which is the size of an umbrella, shows incidents from Wagner's Ring Cycle.
oh wow,
And
yes!
what you can see is, you can see Mima forging a sword, you can see the dragon Fafner being killed by Siegfried, you can see Brynhilde on her rock, and you can see the Valkyries riding their horses.
Oh, there they are.
It's absolutely marvellous.
Yeah.
And between each picture, there's a dragon.
In the 1930s and 40s, it was known for pantomimes and musicals such as Annie Get Your Gun. In 1961, MGM opened as a cinema with Gone with the Wind. In 1968, it was taken over by Sadler's Wells Opera Company, opening with Don Giovanni. They stayed, and the company became known as the English National Opera in 1973.
So you've had some really amazing and very important predecessors, haven't you? I mean, well, Oswald Stoll,
Yeah.
to start with.
Oswald Stoll was a brilliant theatre impresario. He's had his mum as his right-hand woman.
Oh, I see. That's why Adelaide Stoll's statue's in the
Exactly.
in the foyer.
And in the foyer it says the Lady of the Coliseum. And between the two of them, they ran the place sort of like their private variety hall. Rumour has it he used to stand on the Juliet balcony in the dress circle and personally welcome in the 10,000 people through the 4 sittings every day.
Yes. And you're not tempted to do that?
Funny enough, I have done it.
Have
but,
you?
So when it's an opening night of an opera, I'll stand in and welcome people. Often people will think I'm from the cloakroom. Sometimes I'll take them to their seat. I'm obsessed with the place looking tidy, so I'll pick up litter and people will ask what I'm doing. I'll explain I'm the chief exec. And it's really, really important to me that people feel it's a special evening and they're our most special guest.
I was just thinking about Lillian Bayliss.
Yeah.
Actually, I mean, she was one of these visionary leaders, wasn't she, for the English National Opera? And do you take any lessons from her?
So our other Star of the Month award for all staff is called a Lillian.
Oh,
And
okay.
2 staff a month win £1,000.
Oh, wonderful.
And so
That's
they're
great.
nominated by other members of staff. And she was all about bringing music and classical music particularly of an excellent standard to everyone. So it really made sense that someone of her life vision met, had it play out in a theatre like this. Frank Matcham made sure that the cantilevered theatre had no restricted views of the stage.
Great sightlines.
Totally, and that completely was in sync with Lillian Bayliss, where everyone should be allowed to experience fantastic opera. So we now try and reimagine that vision by offering free tickets for under 21s. We don't stick them in the balcony. They can sit in the stalls, the most expensive seats, and come as many times as they want. Under 35s come for 35 quid, and the rest of us, we have a small number of tickets for 10 quid, or the rest of us need to pay their kind of standard price.
Yes. George, Earl of Harwood, do you think about him much? He was a cousin of the Queen, I believe.
He was.
So other end of the social scale, shall we say, from Lillian Bayliss in terms of background.
Yeah.
But what kind of impact did he have on opera in London? And because also I think he ran the Royal Opera House before he came here, didn't he?
I mean, he was transformative. He was obsessed with opera, and both houses spoke to different parts of his personality. I think when he was here, he loved the variety that we do. He loved that it was pretty democratic, that it was sung in English, and we don't have what some people call park and bark.
Yes.
We don't have singers who stand at the front, sing out and do nothing else. We're kind of a lot more theatrical in our opera.
Yeah.
Equally, he loved the Royal Opera House, their international perspective. I think there's an element of him that loved the fact that he was a royal when he was there, whereas here he was a lot more kind of part and parcel of the fabric of the company.
Yeah.
And then he was so obsessed with opera that when he went to Harewood in the summer, he wanted opera there, so he created Opera North as a spin-off from the ENO, and that's gone from strength to strength.
Yes.
So You know, he was at the heart of opera in Britain for decades.
Well, thank you so much. It's been great talking to you.
Pleasure, thanks for coming.
Thank you. So, George, you were a Harvard artist, weren't you, here?
I was, yeah.
At the Coliseum.
I started here in 2012 and went on for 4 years till 2016 as a Harvard artist. Yeah, fantastic.
How did you find, when you were singing actually on the stage, did you find the acoustic a little bit scary? Because, of course, it's a huge auditorium,
Right.
isn't it?
Yeah, I know. I was told a long time ago, whether it's still true, that it's the largest opera theatre in Europe. And with that goes a gigantic barn, of course. And it is, it's intimidating when you're standing there and looking out. It's huge. It's a nice acoustic to sing from, though. It does give back. But after a little while, you just you get used to it with the rehearsals on stage, and you have to learn to trust that's all part of it. It's go hell for leather for a couple of hours, and you'll soon find things going wrong.
Yeah, I can imagine. And tell me, what do you think about the tradition of the folks opera? You know, everything's sung in the local language. Is that a good thing in London, do you think?
Well, I think there's space for both. Obviously, the Royal Opera House across the road, they sing everything in its mother tongue. Here, we mention it's a. I think there was a feeling after the war that perhaps singing in German and in Italian was a little bit politically incorrect, and this is continued. And whilst I suppose that was with Sadler's Wells, which became the English National Opera. No, I definitely think that whilst it remains, you know, an opera house singing in English, it distances itself from being in direct competition with Covent Garden. And as you know, obviously there's a tradition in London of having two warring opera houses all through the 19th century, with the Royal Opera House and the Queen's Theatre, and then the King's Theatre. It became under Edward VII. So by doing something a bit different, and I suppose it's not really the folks opera, but it is streaming a slightly different demographic. It's able to remove itself from being, again, just in complete direct competition with Covent Garden across the road. So
anything amusing?
Well,
that you can.
Well, there's a bit of a tradition, especially with the Harvard artists, of the chorus trying to slightly wind them up on stage, you know, and maybe put them off a bit. It's a bit of fun.
Only in rehearsals.
Oh no!
Oh no!
Oh no!
Actually, in the shows themselves. Gosh.
No, I've had the privilege to do Sharpless in Madame Butterfly a couple of times here, the Anthony Minghella production, which is absolutely beautiful. But it has this enormous rake going up to the very back of the stage, and these steps, very steep steps. They're really only sort of about 20 centimetre steps that you have to negotiate going over and coming off stage. And at the end of the first scene, Sharpless sort of he walks up, going off up the hill and back over the crest, and he sort of stops halfway up and turns to Pinkerton and says, "Be careful," and in this sort of, you know, and they're warning him, you know, don't muck around with it too much, you know, I can see what's coming here. And so I did this on the opening night, and carried on up to the top of the hill, and promptly sort of fell down the stairs like this. So every single night, and I've done that production about 30 times now.
But
every single night, the chorus, I would say, "Be careful," and then about 15 of them would turn and go, "Be careful, George, be careful. Be careful on those stairs, mate." And it was, but no, there was another one with the Pearl Fishers, where Penny Woolcott, the director, she'd sort of done a cultural reference to Pakistan, where Imran Khan had recently been voted in, and part of the sort of the election process and the showing of support for the leader was that you'd get a cutout of the face of the leader, and you'd hold it in front of your face to show support. So she transposed this into the beginning of the Pearl Fishers, where the villagers all vote in Zurga by holding up a photograph of my face, which the chorus all hung on to them and saying, And so they were all floating around, these pictures backstage, and I think it was about a year and a half later we were doing Jonathan Miller's La Bohème, and there's the Act 2 Café Mormousse scene, and we're all sort of mucking around in Café Mormousse as the Bohemians do, and it just sort of quite disconcertingly, all of a sudden, I sort of noticed that there's about 5 or 6 people with my face in front of it, sort of floating around the cafe. And it was, and I was just about to come in with a big line or something like that.
Quite disconcerting.
Of course, the chorus found this absolutely hilarious.
Hilarious.
Managed to get through.
It sounds like you're the butt of the chorus's jokes, or do they do it to
I'd like to
everyone?
think it's not just me, but yeah.
Hopefully not.
Yeah, but lots of fun.
Brilliant.
Very happy times.
To tear apart this company is absolutely criminal.
The recent proposal by the Arts Council England to relocate the ENO to Manchester has been met with widespread dismay. The Coliseum is one of the most loved theatres in London and the ideal home for opera. The north of England is already well served by Opera North. Sabrin Terfel raised a petition already signed by more than 86,000 to save the ENO's funding, so it can remain at the Coliseum where it belongs.
So we've seen that opera has had a vibrant history in London, with fluctuating fortunes, moments of brilliance, as well as its difficulties. Impresarios making money or going broke. So what is the future for the London opera houses? Will they survive? Certainly there are many young opera singers being trained, so there is an interest in performing opera. But is there enough interest from the younger generation for there to be audiences into the late 21st century?
My view is, as London as one of the most significant culture hubs of the world, musical, and it will play a huge role in developing of music life and culture worldwide, and of course, well, the Royal Opera House, English National Opera, all the opera houses here in London. So I think we can say Royal Opera, it was, it is, and it will be.
So there's going to be a really strong future, I think. Vienna and Berlin have 3 opera houses. We have 2. We're one of the world's greatest cities. 2 feels like we're shortchanging London, I think. So there's space for more. I think it's really key that we keep clear distance between the Royal Opera House and the ENO. So we've really stepped into that area of new audiences, particularly younger and more diverse audiences. And the Royal Opera House have continued their international focus and probably cater for a slightly more expensive end of the market than us. But there's room for both.
Despite, the last 2-3 years with all of the craziness that happened with the pandemic and everything, a lot of dark talk about the business and the whole industry itself. I never doubted that it would come back and that it would last. I was kind of worrying about when it would start again because I can't really do much else except sing and perform, so I was getting a bit worried. I think it goes in phases. There are times where it becomes more fashionable. There are many times I see at the opera houses lots of young people. I never doubted that it would come back at some point and be totally fine.
One suggestion that's come up several times is combine English National Opera with the Royal Opera House, and this has never gone down at all well. Another idea is that English National Opera might drop its principle of performing only in English. This would widen its capacity to cast from international singers. Now, my own view is that it would be good to be able to have opera in the original language in a theatre with more affordable seats than the Royal Opera House, which is, by anybody's measure, including in continental terms, very expensive.
For me, it's all about grassroots, the next generation, getting them in. But how do you get them in? And I suppose that's through education. It would help if we had music back on the national curriculum, obviously, and trying to sort of get all that culture back into schools. And I know that ENO do an enormous amount of work with schools. To be fair, I think pretty much every opera house does now.
Yes.
But it's essential, really, for the future of the medium, because without that, people just simply won't come, and perhaps only just be attracted to popular culture. but it's important that it maintains its integrity. For my money, I think, you know, it shouldn't sell out and be ashamed of what it is. And you know, it is a traditional art form, and of course it's very progressive in many ways as well. And there's lots of there are new commissions and exciting stuff. There's exciting stuff happening, but it shouldn't apologise for what it is or who it is. And I think it would gain more respect in that sense.
Well, I think that the opera houses are in good hands and they are safe, in that audiences will always need theatres to see this repertoire in. That's not to say that opera isn't sometimes spectacular when it's done outside of a traditional theatre scenario. Not every piece, but certain pieces with brilliant directors can come alive in different spaces. But there is clearly a space for opera to be done in the theatre, as there is a space for theatre to be done in the theatre and ballet to be done in the theatre. And I think it's wonderful actually to have the Coliseum and the Opera House both there in London, not necessarily as rivals, but just promoting a wealth of the art form, and obviously the more people who get involved the better. I suppose if I had anything to add, I suppose it's interesting the model that these opera houses in London work with, which is different to some of the models in some of the European opera houses. The one that comes to mind is the German kind of Festhaus model, which is when you have singers who are on contract, a salary ostensibly.
Company members.
Yes, and you are involved in everything that's happening, and so suddenly there'll be a Don Giovanni that has been ongoing for 2 or 3 years, and actually it's your turn to jump into the role of Donna Anna, and you've got 3 days to get up to speed. Or then there might be a guest principal that comes in, and they're doing Pelléas and Mélisande, but you've got a week to have a look at it and get on with it. It's not quite the same, although they do new productions, but it's not quite the same as the British system, which tends to have this rehearsal, production, rehearsal, production, rehearsal, production. But I suppose there are interesting conversations to be had about whether there's a more efficient model which has, if I say opera on a conveyor belt, I don't mean that in that way, but the sort of ongoing performance aspect of opera performances, and whether there's something that opera houses will have to look at in the future. But I mean, I can't see them abandoning their posts, and we wouldn't want to.
It's because now you go into the Limbury Theatre, which is the smaller stage in this building, which is now extended to more seats. It used to be 320, I think, if I'm not wrong, seater. Now it's more than 800 seats available. It's a beautiful little theatre, wooden, with great acoustics, great stage. So it's both experimental and also slightly small scale, not as grand as the main stage is.
Yes.
And also you've got people coming in, buying coffee, getting interested in what's happening in the building.
Absolutely.
And perhaps going for an introductory cheap ticket for 4 quid or 6 quid.
Thinking they might just come along and give it a whirl.
Absolutely. I think this is the future of the opera. This is the future of sharing the art form that we all love, me and you are so passionate about.
Absolutely passionate about it, yes.
And we experience it from both sides.
Exactly.
Opera houses will evolve as they react to economic pressures and fashion. Opera has always been a multimedia entertainment and one of the most expensive art forms. And although theatres respond to and benefit from modern technologies like streaming, there will probably always be people who prefer to gather to experience live performance by real people, talented singers and dancers in beautiful theatres.